The footprints only went one way. Date, March 31st, 1922. Location, the Hinterkaifeck farmstead, Bavaria, Germany. The snow around Hinterkaifeck was not the soft, forgiving kind that blanketed Munich. Here, 40 miles north of the city, it was a hard, crusted shell that snapped underfoot like bone. Maria Baumgartner tightened her shawl, her knuckles white as she gripped her meagre suitcase. She was 44 years old, a woman of practical constitution. But as the sleigh pulled away, leaving her at the edge of the dark spruce forest, a shiver traced her spine that had nothing to do with the wind. The farmstead stood alone. It was a fortress of timber and stone, isolated from the village of Kaifeck by a dense shroud of woods. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, instantly snatched away by the gale. Maria had heard the rumours in the village, of course. Everyone had. They said the previous maid had fled the place 6 months ago, hysterical, claiming the house was haunted. She spoke of footsteps in the attic and voices in the walls. Maria, needing the marks, had dismissed it as the nonsense of a superstitious girl. Now, staring at the brooding structure, she wasn't so sure. The heavy oak door creaked open before she could knock. Standing there was Andreas Gruber. At 63, he was a man carved from the same hard earth he tilled, broad, grim, with eyes that seemed to be constantly scanning the horizon for a threat. "You're late," he grunted, stepping aside. The snow, Herr Gruber. Maria apologized, stepping into the warmth. The air inside was thick, smelling of boiled cabbage, stale pipe tobacco, and something else, something musky and stale, like unwashed clothes in a damp cellar. "Work starts now," Andreas said, ignoring her excuse. "Casilia will show you your room. It is off the kitchen. Small, but warm." Maria nodded, following the younger woman. Casilia Gabriel, Andreas's widowed daughter. Casilia was 35, but looked 50, her face drawn tight with a tension that seemed to vibrate through the house. 2 children clung to her skirts, 7-year-old Casilia and the toddler Joseph. "He is in a mood," Casilia whispered as they entered the tiny maid's chamber. It was barely a closet, situated right next to the stable door. "My father, he has not slept well for days." Maria set her bag down on the cot. "The weather," Casilia shook her head, her eyes darting to the ceiling. "The footprints." Maria paused, her hands unfolding a spare apron. "Footprints. 3 days ago," Casilia said, her voice dropping to a hush. "Father found tracks in the snow. They came out of the forest and led all the way to our machine lock. The lock was broken. Vagrants. That is what we hoped. But Father followed the tracks backward. They came from the deep woods. But when he looked for tracks leading away from the house..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "There were none, Maria. The tracks came to the house, and they never left." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. "You mean someone is still here?" "Father searched the barn, the hayloft, the shed. He found nothing, but he found a newspaper on the porch yesterday, a Munich paper. None of us bought it. And the postman didn't bring it." A floorboard creaked above them, not the settling of a house, but the distinct, rhythmic pressure of weight shifting. Maria looked up. "Who is upstairs?" "No one," Casilia whispered, pulling her children closer. "We are all down here." The afternoon bled into a grey, premature twilight. Maria threw herself into the work, trying to drown out the oppressive atmosphere with the noise of scrubbing and cooking. But the house fought back. It was filled with inexplicable sounds. At 4:00 p.m., Maria went to the barn to feed the cattle. The barn was connected directly to the house, a common architectural style in the region to keep the heat in. As she pitched hay, she felt eyes on her. The barn was vast, filled with shadows that stretched and twisted in the lantern light. She saw a depression in the hay in a dark corner of the loft. It looked like someone had been sleeping there. Beside it, pushed into a gap in the wood, was a roof tile that had been moved, creating a small viewing hole that looked directly out toward the forest. Or Maria realized with a jolt down into the courtyard. She hurried back to the kitchen, her heart hammering. Andreas was sitting at the heavy wooden table, cleaning a lantern. He looked up, his eyes hard. "What is it?" "The hay," Maria stammered. "In the loft. It looks slept in." Andreas stopped scrubbing. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "I lost my keys 2 days ago," he muttered, more to himself than her. "The keys to the desk, to the house." "Herr Gruber, you should go to the police in Schrobenhausen," Maria said, her common sense overriding her station. "Police!" he scoffed, "and have them poke their noses in my business. No, I have a rifle. If a fox is in the coop, I will handle it." The sun set, plunging Hinterkaifeck into a darkness so total it felt like a physical weight. Dinner was a silent affair. The soup was hot, but the room felt freezing. Little Casilia ate quickly, her eyes wide, constantly looking at the door leading to the barn. Even the toddler, Joseph, was unusually quiet, picking at his bread. At 7 p.m. the wind died down. The silence that followed was worse. It was a listening silence. "I will check the livestock," Andreas said, standing up. He took the lantern. "Father, wait," Casilia said, half rising. "Sit," he commanded. "The cow is restless. I can hear her kicking the stall." He opened the door connecting the kitchen to the barn. A draught of cold manure-scented air rushed in. The darkness beyond the doorframe seemed to swallow the light of his lantern instantly. He stepped through. The heavy door clicked shut. Maria began to clear the plates. 1 minute passed, then 5. Usually one could hear the soothing lowing of the cattle or the rhythmic sound of pitchforks. But there was nothing, just the creak of the house settling in the cold. "He is taking a long time," Casilia Gabriel, the mother, Andreas's wife, said from her chair by the stove. She was a frail woman, worn down by years of hard labour and her husband's tyranny. "I will go see." She stood up, wrapping her shawl tight. "Andreas," she called out, opening the barn door. There was no answer. "Andreas." She stepped into the darkness. Maria stood by the sink, a wet plate in her hand, the water dripping rhythmically. Drip, drip, drip. She looked at young Casilia. The girl was trembling. "Where are they?" the girl whispered. "Helping with a calf, perhaps," Maria said, her voice sounding hollow to her own ears. "Stay here. 10 minutes. The silence from the barn was absolute. It wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a held breath. "Mama!" Young Casilia slid off her chair. "No," Maria said sharply. "Stay with your brother." "I want Mama," the girl cried, running toward the barn door. "Wait." Maria dropped the plate. It shattered, the sound explosive in the quiet room. But the girl was already through the door. Maria froze. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, to grab the baby and bolt out the front door into the snow. But she didn't know the way to the village. It was pitch black. The freezing cold would kill the child. She stood paralyzed in the kitchen. She strained her ears. She heard a thud, a heavy, dull sound, like a sack of flour hitting the floorboards. Then a soft, strangled cry. Then nothing. Maria backed away from the barn door. She backed until she hit the stove. The heat radiated through her dress, but she felt ice cold. The baby Joseph began to cry in his bassinet. "Hush," Maria whispered, her eyes fixed on the barn door. The latch was simple iron. It wasn't locked. She needed a weapon. She grabbed a heavy cast iron skillet from the drying rack. She waited. 15 minutes passed. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick. Tock. Tick. Tock. Why didn't they come back? Then she heard it. Footsteps. Not from the barn. Above her. Slow, deliberate creaks on the floorboards of the attic, directly above the kitchen. Dust motes danced in the lamplight as the ceiling boards flexed. Someone was walking toward the trapdoor that led down to the hallway. Maria realized then that the tracks in the snow were right. They hadn't left. They had been here the whole time, living in the crawl spaces, watching them eat, listening to them speak. The footsteps stopped directly above the kitchen door. Then the barn door handle began to turn. Slowly, the iron latch lifted with a metallic clack. Maria couldn't breathe. The door creaked inward an inch, revealing a slice of absolute darkness. Gruber, she whispered, though she knew it wasn't him from the darkness of the barn. A hand appeared. It wasn't holding a lantern. It was holding a mattock, a heavy pickaxe used for breaking hard earth. The handle was stained dark. Maria grabbed the baby Joseph from the bassinet. He screamed at the sudden movement. She bolted, not for the front door, but for her room, the tiny maid's chamber next to the kitchen. It was a trap. She knew it, but panic is a primal thing, and it drove her to hide. She slammed her door and threw the bolt. It was a flimsy lock meant for privacy, not defense. She backed into the corner, sliding down to the floor, clutching the screaming infant to her chest. "Shh, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. She heard heavy boots enter the kitchen. They didn't hurry. They were calm, methodical. She heard the intruder stop at the stove. She heard the clink of the stove lid being lifted. The person was adding coal to the fire. They were cold. They were making themselves comfortable. Joseph wouldn't stop crying. His wails filled the small room, a beacon. The boots walked toward her door. They stopped. Maria held her breath, her hand over the baby's mouth, trying to soothe him, trying to mute the sound. There was a heavy sigh from the other side of the door, a human sound. Then the doorknob turned. The lock held. Silence. Maria closed her eyes. Maybe they will leave. Maybe they will take the money and leave. Then came the sound of the mattock. Crack! The wood of the door splintered. Crack! The lock gave way. The door swung open. The light from the kitchen spilled in, casting a long, distorted shadow across Maria and the child. She looked up, squinting against the light, trying to see the face of the man who stood there. But he was just a silhouette, a shadow born of the Hinterkaifeck isolation. He slowly raised the mattock. Epilogue. 4 days later. The postman noticed the mail piling up. The mechanic, Albert Hoffner, arrived on April 4th to repair the engine. As scheduled, he worked for hours, banging on the door, shouting for the Grubers. He repaired the engine, ate his lunch on the doorstep, and left, annoyed by their rudeness. He told the neighbours the place was deserted, but the dog was tied up and barking, and he had seen smoke from the chimney. Suspicion finally drove the neighbours to break down the door. They found them in the barn. Andreas, his wife, his daughter Kazilia, her daughter little Kazilia. They had been stacked like cordwood, covered with hay. They found Maria Baumgartner in her room, lying on her bed. The toddler, little Joseph, was in his bassinet. The mattock was found buried in the hay next to the bodies, but the most chilling detail wasn't the violence. It was what happened after. The police investigation revealed that the killer or killers had stayed in the house for days after the murders. They had eaten the bread Maria had baked. They had cut slices of meat from the pantry. They had kept the fire going in the kitchen stove to stay warm. They had even fed the cattle. And when the neighbours finally approached the farm on April 4th, seeing the smoke rising from the chimney, the killer simply slipped out the back, disappearing into the forest, leaving no tracks leading away, vanishing as if they had been a ghost all along. To this day, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved. The heads of the victims were removed for examination in Munich, and later lost during the chaos of World War II. The farm was demolished a year later. But in the local taverns of Bavaria, they still say that if you walk near the place where the farm once stood, you should never look back at your own footprints in the snow, because you might see that they only go one way.